to be open to the awareness of your presence. As we set aside the troubles of this moment and allow your healing love to flow through us into this moment, we are blessed. As we allow ourselves to be present to the circumstances of this moment, but not entangled, to allow us to be aware of the trials and tribulations that others are going through, but not to be ensnared. To realize that that healing presence that is you moving through us is our contribution to the healing of this world. We give thanks. And in that realization, together we say, Amen. Amen. Well, when it hits the fan, I had the opportunity of growing up, coming out of high school and into college at the height of Vietnam War. And my grades were not, well, shall we say I wasn't paying attention in college. And at the end of my second year, I realized that, I'm not going to be able to make it through this next year with the grades that I've got, and the Army's going to come for me. So I decided that I would engage with the only reserve program that I could find that was open. The Army Reserve had, like a year waiting list, and Navy likewise, and Coast Guard similarly. And it turns out that the only reserve program that was available for my enrollment was the Marines. Well, I thought that was pretty cool. I'm going to be a Marine, right? So I headed off to San Diego. There were 3 of us on the plane from Denver, and we were all going to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, MCRD, in San Diego. This was my first time in an airplane, by the way, so I was just really excited about that. So on the way out, I was looking out the window, and I was seeing the mountains, and I was seeing the deserts, and I was seeing the cloud formations, and it was all very cool. And we got to the terminal in San Diego, and we were told to go to the Marine staff sergeant that was at a particular desk. And so we walked up, the 3 of us, and he says, "All right, recruit, get out to the sidewalk, stand at attention. There'll be a bus by in the next 15 to 30 minutes." Okay, sir. So we went out, stood by the by the curb in the designated place, and we hadn't been there but 2 or 3 minutes, and a car pulled up, and a passenger window rolled down, and the passenger said to the driver in a very loud voice, "You know the sound it makes when the shit hits the fan? Marine!" I realized at that point that I was in for an experience that I probably would come to appreciate in some way. Yeah, so it was it was an appreciated experience. That was not necessarily a positive appreciation, but nonetheless, we have these circumstances in our life that where it seems like it's hitting the fan, and so how do we address that? We have in John Pavlovitz's work, Hope and Other Superpowers, we have this list of superpowers that he speaks of. Last week we talked about compassion, humility, and kindness. We're going to be talking about courage, persistence, and sacrifice today. The tone of our actions, the humor, creativity, and what's that last one? Honesty. And the fourth group is wonder, gratitude, and hope. Well, so we're going to be talking about courage and sacrifice and persistence today. You know, one of the things that I have found in my, I guess, 26 years, 27 years of being involved in ministry. I've been a minister for 20, but I was assistant minister up at Unity of Boulder for 4 years before ministerial school. I had the opportunity to do some counseling while I was there, and a fellow came in. He was a double black diamond skier. He was a cliff skier. You know, he's this skier that would climb to the top of a mountain and find a path of white down to the bottom and ski it. You know, he was a super skier. He was, when he came to me, he was probably 55. So he'd had the best years of his skiing life behind him. And he was suffering from what his doctors called was an allergy to protein. He had only certain types of protein that he could ingest, and even those proteins would cause him to have extreme pain. He would be bedridden for several days. So he was going through this cycle of ingestion of, you know, the necessary foods to keep him alive, and then he would be down for 3 or 4 days in pain from that influx of protein. So he was at his wit's end. In fact, he came to me. He said, "I don't know that I can go on. This is such a painful experience. I just want to kill myself." That is perhaps the most challenging aspect of ministry, is in counseling, working with people that are at the end of their rope. And you know, the interesting thing is that there are a lot of people walking this planet that are near the end of their rope, whether it be finances or it be medical issues such as his, or it be relationship issues or career issues, or well, you name it. You know, the categories of tribulation that people have seem to be almost endless. But confronting that point where, yeah, you look below and there's no more rope. I mean, you are right there at the end of it. That is, obviously, that's challenging for the person experiencing it, and it is challenging for the minister who is dealing with that counseling or being called upon to offer guidance in that situation. Not having actually been to the end of my rope, having had many tribulations in my life, but not being to the end of my rope, it's hard for me to personally relate, except that when I was 9 years old, my uncle committed suicide. And he was my only uncle. I could say easily that he was my favorite uncle. I very much enjoyed his presence. But he had medical issues, he had financial issues, he was an executor of an estate, and while he did not leave a suicide note, we certainly know it was suicide. He offed himself with a shotgun through the heart in the basement of his house. I can only imagine the kind of pain that he was going through to be able to decide that this degree of pain was not worth his sticking around. So as I was working with this skier, I had a personal relationship with suicide, but I had a very difficult time identifying with what he was going through, because he was eating to stay alive, but in staying alive, he was putting himself into this chronic pain for 3 or 4 days before he could finally get back out and get up and around. So getting to the end of your rope requires a stiffness of the spine. It requires an intensity to move forward, and it requires oftentimes sacrifice of one sort or another, either the sacrifice that you have just undergone or sacrifice that you're about to undergo. So we have, as we walk through our lives, we encounter people of various complexions, people of various genders, people of various heights, weights, and people of various degrees of being near the end of their rope. It's when we realize that, it calls upon us to be gentle, to realize that the person that we're interacting with, the person that we're engaged with, either casually or intimately, may have things going on that we just don't understand, that we don't fathom. So we have a charge to use our superpowers as we move through the day. Mother Teresa offered us this quote. She said, "Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love." Doing small things with great love, opening doors, smiling, letting someone into your line in the grocery store, things that seem to be an inconvenience can perhaps make someone else's day. I have great joy as I talk with people in my life, as people I encounter casually or with people that I know very well. I have great joy when I am conscious of the fact that I might have some little iota of blessing to offer the person that I'm interacting with, right? I talked to you about the practice of paying it forward. Several weeks ago, I related a circumstance at our favorite coffee shop up in Estes Park, and that act of offering someone assistance by, for instance, purchasing their coffee for them or purchasing their meal for them. And we might be out $10 or $15, but that kind of that kind of heartfelt expansion is really a significant benefit, more to us as the giver than to the individual receiving, perhaps. So we have the opportunity to step into the brew of our lives and be that pillar for someone needing a pillar for support. But as well, we have the opportunity when we are confronted with situations. We have opportunities to get into the mix of things. It can be very challenging. Courage is one of those superpowers that calls upon us to step into the fray. Now, we may not be confronted with having to run into a burning building. We may not be confronted with the with the prospect of standing up and advancing in the face of enemy fire. But we have the opportunity throughout the day, throughout our week, throughout our year, we have the opportunity to decide that we're going to step forward and we're going to bear the burden. We're going to carry the load. We're going to stiffen our backs to address whatever circumstance there is. And God knows, I mean, Ken's offering prayer, request for prayer, we have ample opportunity to be courageous in this time. Pavlovitz, pardon the expression of French in this, Pavlovitz says that the world needs people willing to give fear the finger because they inspire others to be audacious and brave too. This is how movements of hope are started. When 1 or 2 or 50 people decide that terrible things won't overwhelm them, when people are courageous enough to run into the fray and fight for goodness, even if it scares the hell out of them. When ordinary people remember how strong and brave they can be, the tide turns. And it can turn, it can pivot on the actions of a single person. It can pivot on the expression of courage by a single individual. And perhaps it is not something that is enormous. Maybe it's something very small. Mother Teresa said that we have the opportunity to do many small things with great love. And courage is about stepping into the fear. If there was no fear there, it wouldn't be requiring courage, right? But fear is one of the polar values of what I'm coming to consider to be the one spiritual force. The one spiritual force has on the one end of it fear, and it has on the other end of it love. And to the extent that we are able to focus on love, the fear is not present. So the spiritual force that we are all engaged in, whether we realize it or not, the spiritual force calls us to pay attention to the fear to the extent that it can guide us in our actions, but to not let the fear overwhelm us. Moving with courage through our lives, dissolving the fear through our expression of unconditional love. And then we have as we address these issues that are in our lives, and as we help others that are engaged in their tribulation, we have 3 powerful but ultimately finite resources: time, money, and influence. And we begin walking into life. We're meant to have the kind of life that can repair. We're meant to have the kind of life that can repair the planet by learning how to wisely and responsibly use these resources to alleviate suffering, to generate goodness, to rectify injustice. Our ability to help and give hope is the sum total of these 3 resources. Generosity is an investment of yourself in something that is beyond yourself. Sacrifice. We're often called to sacrifice in some way or another. Sacrifice our time. Sacrifice our resources, our money. To sacrifice our influence. By that he means that we are often put into a position where we have to state boldly our position in a way that is going to allow others to realize that we have this perspective, we have this worldview that is going to, we think, alleviate pain, alleviate difficulty. And that statement of worldview can often be sacrificial. It can affect relationships. It can affect how we are able to progress in the world. But nonetheless, it is a resource that is available to us if we choose to use it as part of that persuasive scheme. But sacrifice is an aspect of, sacrifice is an awareness that we have this to offer. And if we are willing to offer that to the betterment of those with whom we interact, if we're able to offer that to something greater than ourselves, it could be a movement, it could be an organization, it could be a community of people, that when we're willing to sacrifice to that which is greater than ourselves, we are demonstrating that generosity that allows us to move through the world with our heads held high. And then the third superpower that we are talking about is persistence. My wife has said to me, not a few times, that one of the problems I have is persistence. That I stick with things perhaps longer than is appropriate. But that's just an aspect of who I am. I persist. John offers, let me back up for just a moment. John was talking about, in fact, he was encountering someone, a high school student. He was a blogger. He is a blogger, but he had contact with this high school student through his blog. The high school student was in Ohio, and John was in North Carolina at the time. And he talked about this fellow, Brandon. Brandon was having difficulty in high school. He didn't give the details of it, but he said that Brandon was in such pain that he couldn't see a reason to continue. And having a child that went through high school, I can understand the kind of pain that he might be talking about. That pain was so great that Brandon was about to commit suicide, or at least he was talking about committing suicide. That's the challenge that ministers have. In fact, anyone who is working with someone who is talking about suicide, is that you really don't know how close they are to making that decision. The skier that I was talking with, I would have a counseling session with him, sometimes once a week, sometimes once every 2 months. This was before I went to ministerial school. When I came back from ministerial school, he was still around. He hadn't decided to off himself. And we, in fact, continued counseling after I returned for about 2 or 3 years. We met at a local library up in Boulder. And I didn't hear from him again. I actually don't know at this point in time what he had decided to do. But, and that's another aspect of counseling with someone like this, is that sometimes they just disappear off the radar screen. And that happened with Brandon. Brandon, after John had worked with him for several weeks, he decided that he hadn't heard from Brandon, so he wrote a blog post. And in his blog post, he says, if you stick around, hoping that Brandon wouldn't see this, because Brandon had seen the prior blog post, he says, if you stick around, you will reach a spot that the sadness won't let you see right now. You'll reach tomorrow. And that place is filled with possibility. It is a day you've never been to. It is not this terrible day. There you will not feel exactly what you are feeling right now. You may be stronger or see things differently or find a clearing, and life may look a way it hasn't in a long time. It may look worth staying for. Well, it turns out just a few weeks prior to John writing this book, he said he heard back from Brandon. And Brandon wrote back to him and said he had mentioned that he and John had talked about 3 years prior. And that's the kind of conversation you don't forget. Right? But he emailed back to John, and he says, I decided to stick around, and I'm glad I did. And that's the interesting thing about this. That's the potential about this, is that, you have these issues that are going on, and it may seem like there is no light at the end of the tunnel. It may seem like the darkest day has just occurred, and the day that tomorrow is going to not exist at all. But Brandon decided to stick around, and he was glad he did. That persistence that we sometimes need to call upon is to move that foot forward, to place our weight on that leading foot and drag that back foot forward, set it firmly ahead of us, shift our weight and move forward. That persistence of step by step by step. That is a superpower. That is something that we can offer not just to ourselves, but we can offer it to others through both our modeling of our own persistence as well as to encourage them, to show them that in some way, to suggest to them that there is a better day coming. Just drag that back leg forward, plant that foot firmly, and shift your weight. So, courage, sacrifice, persistence. These are powers that we can offer both to ourselves and to those with whom we interact. And he says, no one is capable of giving what you can give this hurting world, because your circle of influence, your experience, and your resources are unlike anyone else's. This is why your generosity is necessary and so priceless, because your specific wealth is unprecedented. The resources that you bring, your experience, your encouragement, your words of hope, your words of moving forward, your ability to convey to the person with whom you're working, with whom you're interacting, that yes, indeed, there is a better day tomorrow. Stiffen your spine. Do what's necessary and step forward. We'll have our meditation. As we come into our meditation, let us come in with I cast all my cares. It is a sacred moment. But in this sacred moment, we acknowledge the presence of God. We allow that love of God to flow through us, moving to every part of our consciousness, every part of our body. And in the awareness of this love streaming through us, our fear disappears. It allows us, this love, this unconditional love moving through us, allows us to raise our eyes to the horizon. To garner the strength, both our physical strength and our mental strength, to move forward. It allows us to realize that this love, that this unconditional love moving through us is unlimited. And in that unlimited resource, we are able to offer all that we have, knowing that what we have will be replenished. offering our love, offering our time, offering our attention, offering encouragement. Each and every person that we encounter can benefit from this unconditional love that is moving through us right now. And this unconditional love costs us nothing. The time that we invest to assist is time that is for building our own joy, helping us be in touch with our community. So in this sacred moment, we settle into this altar of God that lies somewhere in the center of our consciousness. And if we are so inclined in this moment and in each moment that we choose, we can say to that God within, to that Christ light, I am here to do what is necessary for the good of myself and my community. The people with whom I interact are here for a reason. I am that reason. I rest in the awareness of this love. I rest in this unconditional love streaming through me, calling upon me to allow it to stream into the moment. And when I open that flow, I am in love. That is my experience. That is the joy. That allows me to stiffen my spine, to step forward persistently, and to give of myself that which I am called to give. Breathing in and breathing out in this pristine, sacred moment. I am blessed. Breathing in, breathing out. And in the awareness of this love, we come to this time to which we say, Amen. And from this, let us sing the Lord's Prayer.